I never intended to buy a house like this. I had imagined myself living in a small apartment or a cozy townhouse, maybe with a dog. But after my aunt passed, the house on Willow Street became mine. I didn't think much of it at first. It was just an old, neglected Victorian home with more charm than utility. But real estate isn't cheap, and free property, well, that was something I couldn't pass up. The first time I stepped inside, I noticed how time had withered the place. The once vibrant wallpaper peeled in long, faded strips, and the wooden floor creaked under every footstep. A stale smell of dust and mildew lingered in the air. Yet, despite its disrepair, something about it called to me. Maybe it was the isolation, the fact that it stood alone at the end of a forgotten road. Or maybe it was the dark, narrow hallway that seemed to stretch longer than it should. I moved in the following week. With little more than a few boxes, an old sofa, and my determination to make it work, I settled in. The house groaned as if it were alive, the wooden beams expanding and contracting with each shift in temperature. I chalked it up to the age of the place, but that gnawing sensation in my gut wouldn't let me forget that something about it felt wrong. It started with a sound. Late at night, when the house was still, I'd hear a faint creaking from beneath the floorboards. At first, I figured it was just the wood settling, but it happened at the same time every night, around 2 a.m. The sound would begin as a low groan, like someone dragging something heavy, then stop abruptly, leaving the silence even more unnerving. One night, curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed a flashlight and crouched down to listen closely to the floor. The sound was louder this time, almost rhythmic, like footsteps. My heart raced as I pressed my ear to the cold wood, and for the first time, I felt the vibrations. Something was moving below me. I backed away quickly, convincing myself it was just a rat or maybe some old pipes knocking around. But as the nights went on, the noise grew louder, more insistent. I noticed small things too. Objects in my house weren't where I left them. Doors would be slightly ajar when I knew I'd closed them. The old brass key in the front door would occasionally be warm to the touch, as if someone had just used it. After a particularly restless night, I decided to investigate. I tore up a small section of the floor in the living room, determined to find the source of the noise. What I found underneath made my blood run cold. There was a small crawl space, barely big enough for a person to fit. But the space itself wasn't what terrified me. It was the marks. Deep, jagged scratches lined the underside of the floorboards, as if someone or something had been clawing at it from below. The scratches were erratic, frenzied, and recent. I recoiled, my flashlight shaking as I tried to make sense of it. Could an animal have gotten trapped down there? But how could an animal make scratches like that? They were almost deliberate, like someone trying to get you. But that night, the creaking returned, louder than ever before. It wasn't coming from beneath me anymore. It was all around me. A few days later, a foul odor began to fill the house. It was a thick, nauseating stench that clung to everything. My clothes, the furniture, the very walls themselves. No matter how much I cleaned or aired out the house, the smell persisted, growing stronger with each passing day. The worst part was that the smell seemed to be coming from underneath the floorboards. I tried ignoring it, tried focusing on work, but every time I returned home, the odor would hit me like a wall. It was like something rotting beneath the surface, decaying right under my feet. One night, as I lay in bed, the smell became unbearable. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a hammer and made my way to the living room, determined to tear up the floor again. As I began to pry open the boards, the stench grew even stronger, and with it came something else. A faint, distant whisper. I could hear it, words I couldn't make out, but words nonetheless. It was coming from the crawl space. With trembling hands, I removed the last board, shining my flashlight down into the darkness. The smell was overwhelming now, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from what I saw. There, in the crawl space, was a small, rotted door, half buried in dirt. I didn't want to open the door. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to leave, to run, to never look back. But something drew me to it. I reached down, gripping the rusted handle. The metal was cold and slick with moisture, but it turned easily. The door opened with a low groan, revealing a narrow passageway that descended into darkness. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment, I thought I saw movement at the bottom of the steps, a shadow shifting in the gloom. Against my better judgment, I climbed down into the passage. The air was damp and heavy, the walls lined with thick roots that snaked through the soil like veins. The whispers grew louder, more distinct now, echoing off the walls. They weren't just words anymore, they were voices, dozens of them, all speaking at once, overlapping in a chaotic, maddening chorus. I continued down, the light from my flashlight barely piercing the darkness ahead. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I saw it. The floor was covered in old, brittle bones, human bones, piled in a disorganized heap. Among them were strange symbols etched into the dirt, symbols that seemed to pulse with a sickly, greenish light. And in the center of it all stood a figure, tall, gaunt, its face obscured by a hooded cloak. The whispers stopped. The figure stepped forward. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My legs refused to move, rooted to the ground as the figure approached. It towered over me, its face still hidden in shadow. Then, slowly, it raised a hand and pointed to the wall behind me. I turned, and that's when I saw it. A mirror cracked and covered in dust. But it wasn't my reflection staring back at me. It was the house as it had once been, alive with people. I saw figures moving about, laughing, talking, living their lives. But something was wrong. Their faces were hollow, their eyes empty, and the longer I looked, the more their movements became erratic, jerky. Then they turned toward me. One by one, they began to claw at the mirror, their hollow faces twisted in silent screams. The glass cracked further with each impact, spiderwebbing outward until it shattered completely. I was back in the crawl space, the figure gone. But the whispers remained, louder now, echoing inside my head. I ran. I don't remember how I made it back upstairs, but I fled the house that night. I haven't been back since. I don't think I truly escaped. Even now, sitting in my cramped apartment, miles away from Willow Street, I can still hear it. The faint, maddening whispering that crawls into my thoughts when the night grows quiet. I tried everything to drown it out. Blaring music, leaving the TV on, drinking myself into a stupor. But it never leaves. It's like the house marked me, tethered my mind to whatever nightmare lurked beneath its floorboards. I haven't told anyone about it. Who would believe me? The few times I tried to bring it up with friends, I saw the concern in their eyes, the way they shifted uncomfortably in their seats. So I stopped talking about it. I stopped talking, period. Weeks went by, and I did my best to pretend life was normal. But there's only so much pretending you can do when you start seeing things that shouldn't be there. It started small. Shadows flickering in the corner of my vision. Fleeting images of those hollow-faced figures from the mirror. I would catch them for a second, barely long enough to register, but it was always enough to send a chill down my spine. I told myself I was imagining it, that my mind was still playing tricks on me after what happened in the house. Then the nightmares began. The dreams always start the same way. I'm back in the house, standing in the living room, staring at the spot where I tore up the floor. The boards are splintered and jagged, as if something from below burst through them. I can feel the presence of the thing, the figure in the cloak, waiting for me down in the crawl space. And every time, no matter how hard I try to resist, I end up descending into that cold, suffocating darkness. The whispers are always louder in the dreams, almost deafening. But unlike before, I can understand them now. They call to me, not with words, but with an overwhelming sense of dread, a force that compels me to keep moving forward. I follow the passageway deeper than I ever did in reality, past the bones, past the roots, until I reach a chamber. A vast, underground cavern with walls that seem to breathe. And there, at the center of the chamber, is the figure. It stands waiting, its hood still concealing its face, but now it holds something. Something that makes my blood run cold every time I see it. It's a mirror, the same mirror from the crawl space. In my dreams, I always wake up just before I see my reflection. After weeks of these nightmares, I did something I swore I'd never do. I went back to the house. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't pack. I just drove, my mind numb with the need for answers. I had to know why the house wouldn't leave me alone, why I couldn't escape the whispers. The house on Willow Street looked the same as I left it, its weathered facade still looming at the end of the road, half hidden by overgrown trees. But as soon as I stepped out of the car, I knew something had changed. The air felt thick, oppressive, like the house was breathing me in, waiting for my return. The door creaked open easily, as if it had been expecting me. The smell hit me instantly, the same rancid odor of decay, but stronger now, more suffocating. I gagged, covering my nose as I stepped inside. The house was eerily silent. I went straight to the living room, to the spot where I'd torn up the floor. I had sealed it before I left, but as I approached, I saw the boards were already splintered again, as if someone had ripped them apart from below. My hands trembled as I knelt down, my breath shallow and quick. I could feel the pull of whatever was beneath me, drawing me closer. The crawl space was just as I remembered it, but the passageway seemed different. It looked wider, deeper, as if it had expanded since the last time I was here. And at the far end, where I had once found the rotted door, there was now something else. A hole. A gaping, black hole that seemed to stretch down into infinity. The whispers started again, louder than ever, filling my head with their chaotic, overlapping voices. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but the feeling was unmistakable. They wanted me to go down. They wanted me to see. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe I had already lost my mind by then, but I climbed down into the hole. The air grew colder with each step I took, and the darkness became almost tangible, like it was pressing against me from all sides. I couldn't see the walls anymore. It felt like I was descending into a void. The whispers echoed around me, their intensity growing, and with them came a new sound, the unmistakable scrape of something dragging itself toward me. I reached the bottom, and the cold hit me like a wave. I shined my flashlight around, and that's when I saw it. The chamber was massive, far larger than it had any right to be beneath a simple house. The walls pulsed, like they were alive, and in the center of the room, standing before the same broken mirror from my nightmares, was the figure. This time, its face was visible. It was my face. Not just a reflection, not just some warped version of myself. It was me, standing there, staring back at me with hollow, empty eyes. Its skin was pale, stretched tight over bone, and its lips curled into a sickening smile. "Welcome home," it said, in a voice that wasn't mine but close enough to send chills down my spine. I stumbled backward, my flashlight shaking in my hand. The whispers surged, their voices rising to a fever pitch, and the walls of the chamber began to close in around me, shifting and writhing like they were alive. The thing that looked like me stepped closer, its smile widening, and as it reached out a hand, I realized something horrifying. It wasn't just mimicking me. It was me, the same me that had clawed at the floorboards from beneath, the same me that had tried to escape this nightmare before. And now it was waiting for me to take my place. I turned and ran, scrambling back up the passage, the sound of dragging footsteps close behind me. The whispers followed, louder, more insistent, filling my mind with their maddening chorus. When I burst through the door of the house and into the daylight, everything went silent. The whispers stopped. The house stood still, empty, and lifeless once again. But I know it's not over. I can feel it now, the pull of the house, the way it's marked me. No matter how far I run, no matter how much I try to forget, the house is still with me. And one day I'll have to go back. Because the house doesn't just want me, needs me. The days after my second visit to the house felt like a blur. I tried to convince myself it wasn't real, that what I saw down there in that twisted chamber was just a product of my deteriorating mind. But the truth gnawed at me, creeping into my thoughts, whispering to me in the dead of night. The thing I saw, the other me, it wasn't just waiting for me to come back. It was growing stronger. Every night, the dreams returned, worse than before. This time, I wasn't just descending into the crawlspace, I was being dragged. I could feel unseen hands pulling me down into the dark, into the depths of the house. And every night, I would wake just as the walls began to close in on me, gasping for breath, covered in cold sweat. But one night, the dream changed. I didn't wake up. I reached the bottom of the chamber, and the mirror was waiting for me, shattered and bleeding light. And there, in the reflection, I saw them, the faces, all the others who had come before me. They were screaming, their hollow mouths open wide. The house wasn't just alive. It was hungry. I stopped pretending that I could escape. I knew the house wouldn't let me go. It had taken a piece of me the moment I first walked through its door, and now it was pulling me back in. The third time I returned to the house, I didn't bother bringing a flashlight. There was no point. I wasn't coming back this time. The front door was already open, waiting for me. The smell of rot hit me as soon as I crossed the threshold, stronger than ever, suffocating. The floorboards creaked under my weight, but I knew there was no use in being careful. The house wanted me to fall. The hole in the living room was larger now, a gaping wound in the floor that seemed to pulse with every breath I took. The crawlspace was gone, replaced by the endless void I had seen in my dreams. Without hesitation, I stepped into it, the ground beneath me giving way as I descended into the abyss. The whispers returned, louder and more frantic. They didn't scare me anymore. They were just a constant now, part of the house's rhythm, part of me. As I reached the bottom, the chamber came into view again, just as I had left it. The walls were moving, twisting, their surfaces alive with the faces of the dead. And there, in the center, was the mirror. The figure that had worn my face was waiting for me. It stood in front of the broken glass, its hollow eyes fixed on mine. That same sickening smile stretched across its lips. "You know why you're here," it said, its voice echoing around the chamber. I did know. I had always known. The house didn't just take people, kept them. It made them part of itself. And now it was my turn. I stepped forward, feeling the cold grip of the house closing in around me, the walls tightening as if they were swallowing me whole. My reflection stared back at me from the cracked surface of the mirror, distorted, but unmistakably me. The figure reached out its hand, and I took it. As our hands touched, the whispers stopped, replaced by a deafening silence. I felt a surge of cold shoot through me, freezing me to the core. My vision blurred, the chamber around me twisting and warping as the walls closed in. The mirror began to glow, its light flickering like a dying flame, and for the first time, I saw the truth. The house wasn't just a structure. It was a prison, a living, breathing entity that had fed on the souls of those it ensnared for decades, maybe centuries. And now it had me. My figure, was gone, absorbed into the house, and I realized I was the one standing in front of the mirror now. I was the reflection, the one trapped in the glass, waiting for the next poor soul to stumble upon the house, to take my place. The walls closed around me, sealing me in darkness. The house exhaled, satisfied. I am part of it now. My thoughts, my voice, my very being, all swallowed by the shadows beneath the floorboards. And as the years pass, the house will wait again. It always waits. It needs to be fed, and it will find another. The whispers will call out to them just like they called out to me. And when they arrive, they'll see me, standing in front of the mirror, smiling, waiting,